Firstly, thank you for coming into the studio.
No problem.
Just give us just a bit of background as to how long you've been an MMA fan. I know you've got this MMA fan podcast out, which we'll talk about in more detail. But how long have you been involved with the sport?
Well, I've been a fan for a long time, but I suppose I was dipping in and out of it in the days of the kind of Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz era, the kind of like mid-noughties, I guess, mid to late noughties. But then I got really into it kind of, I suppose, just before the Conor thing started, the Conor McGregor thing all started up. I was watching a season of The Ultimate Fighter with John Jones and Chael Sonnen, and it got me really, really hooked on it. And then during the pandemic, I was on a podcast with a friend of mine, Stu Whiffin, talking about music, and then we stopped the pod, and we didn't realise we were both fans of MMA, and after the pod we suddenly got onto MMA and chatted for about an hour and a half just about MMA, and went, we've just been talking for a long time about this, and you're the only person I know that's as into it, as much into it as I am. So we decided to start a podcast about it, and it's gone phenomenally well. We thought it'd just be the two of us chatting rubbish about what we liked about the sport, but we've ended up having phenomenal fighters on the show, like Michael Bisping, the first ever British UFC champion, Dan Hardy, Alexander Volkanovski, who's the current featherweight champ and was the pound for pound #1 in the world up until very, very recently. So we've had some phenomenal guests on the show, and we like talking about the big upcoming cards, and then we, talk about the cards when they've just gone and all the drama that's happened within it. It's loads of fun.
We had Dan Hardy when Joe and I used to do the sports bar together. We had Dan Hardy. I think it was on every week, wasn't he?
That's right.
And he came into the studio and he showed us his shins. Have you seen his shins?
I've not seen his shins.
And he was he was living with monks for a year, wasn't he?
That's something weird.
And his shins are, it's quite incredible. These guys are tough. They're like built differently to us.
They are built very, very differently to us. It's not just, you hear about boxers and fighting fit and all that stuff. MMA, the amount of disciplines you have to be good at to succeed in this sport, they'll never be able to win a boxing match against a boxer, but the fact that they can kick the legs, to use elbows, knees, then you've got to worry about the takedowns, the jiu-jitsu. So many facets to MMA that make it such an exciting sport to watch and to get into, because you just don't know what's coming next. And the UFC 286, which you mentioned, coming up tomorrow night, that fight was unbelievable, because Kamaru Usman, other than a little bit in round one, was basically dominating the entire fight up until the last minute of the very last round. Leon Edwards looked done. The commentators were writing him off. They said that he looked dejected, that just getting to the end of the fight and not being finished was a win for him. Then out of nowhere, he pulls out this head kick that was in no way lucky, because they released footage of the coaches going over Usman. When he's slipping a punch, he dips like this. He's perfect there for the head kick. It was planned, and he did this with a minute to go when he'd lost 20-odd minutes of this fight. It was out of absolutely nowhere, and it was so special. And that's why we're going to be here tomorrow at the O2 to watch UFC 286, because Leon Edwards has brought a pay-per-view event to the UK for only the second time ever. The first time was Michael Bisping against Dan Henderson about 6 years ago or so, or whatever it was. And now we're here in London for the first big kind of pay-per-view event.
Is this the biggest one then that the UK's had, would you say?
I would say, yeah, because it's a big pay-per-view. The Manchester one with Bisping was a big one as well. But I think the reason this is maybe bigger is because Kamaru Usman was the pound-for-pound guy at the time that they fought originally, which is, one of the reasons that this was such a shocking upset, was because Usman was talking about going and boxing Canelo, or moving up 2 weight classes to go for the light heavyweight belt. He was talking about this, obviously took his eye off the ball a little bit. Little Leon Edwards comes along, head kick out of nowhere, and now we're here. And I think it is bigger because we've got a trilogy fight, and we've got two elite level athletes that are the top of their game, whereas I think Bisping, Henderson was not ranked anywhere near as highly as challengers normally would be. This is the one.
How much money were these to earn for this? Because the reason I said, we saw a fight a couple of weeks ago, the ridiculous YouTuber, was it Jake Paul against Tommy Fury? And the numbers they were banding around, it was something like Jake Paul got something like 7 million, Tommy Fury got something like 4 million, which is, I get it, it's all supply and demand, I get it, it's still outrageous. What kind of money are we talking about for these two, roughly?
That's something I wouldn't know about. I mean, with the Jake Paul figures, I've heard from some circles that you can't always believe what you hear. So I don't know whether that's true, whether it's not. I don't know about the kind of the releases of those figures and how accurate they are. With this, they'll have their contracts, which they'll be paid. But then on top of that, they'll be getting pay-per-view points because this is a pay-per-view event. So if everyone in North America is buying it on ESPN and in the UK and everywhere are buying it on BT Sport, I mean, I suppose the ceiling is however many people want to buy the show.
Has it surprised you over the last 15 years? This has got to be one of the most watched sports now, a growing sport. You went 15 years ago, you'd find it maybe on Channel 5 or something, or hidden.
It was
now,
Bravo, I think, was a channel it was on. Well,
there
if anyone's old enough to remember Bravo.
we all are. But it feels to me as though that we are still very much in the infancy of where this sport can eventually be. I mean, it's everywhere, right? You're doing podcasts on it. Yeah. It's on pay-per-view. It's on BT. It's absolutely... How much bigger can it get? And will it ever be bigger than boxing?
That, I don't know. Boxing's been around for so long. You've got to remember, like the UFC. I know MMA or you know, in its early incarnations have been around for a long, long time. But the UFC, the way that they've made the sport so accessible to people, has only been going for 30 years. And boxing is how old? 100. You know, so it's very hard to compare them. But I think it can continue to grow. I think I've heard that it's the fastest growing sport in the world. It's getting picked up more and more in a variety of countries. And I think the UK is very much an epicenter for a huge growth of fandom for the sport. And that's, you know, where I suppose me and Stu Whiffen, my co-host for the MMA Fan Podcast, have come in, where, you know, we are not coaches, we're not fighters, we're not journalists, we are fans of the sport, and we've somehow been doing this show. People have liked it, and we've found ourselves now in a place where we're sort of MMA media members that are doing events with the UFC. I was at the press conference yesterday, got to ask questions to champion Leon Edwards and Justin Gaethje, who is the self-proclaimed, and also I would agree with him, the most exciting fighter to ever step foot in the octagon, and he'll be in the co-main event tomorrow night, so that's going to be fireworks as well.